G'day and welcome to another episode of Kiwi Car Life. And a number of years ago, Top Gear compared the Mark 7 Golf GTI with the BMW M135i. And all because he spun off the road in the pouring rain and the BMW decided that the Golf was a much better car. But as I'm the owner of this M135i, I'm not so sure. So today we're going to be revisiting the M135i versus the Mark 7 Golf GTI to see if Jeremy Clarkson was right in suggesting that the people's car is the best hot hatch ever made. In terms of exterior styling, he might be onto something, because one of the frustrations I have with my 135 is that, look, it's not a bad looking car and it definitely looks better than the first generation 1 Series, like the old 130i that I used to have, but the only way to tell that this is their highest performance rear wheel drive 6-cylinder turbocharged hot hatch is a couple of twin exhausts at the back. It literally looks exactly the same as a 118D, but there is no mistaking that this is a Golf GTI. It's got a red stripe at the front with the GTI badge, same on the back. The wheels look fantastic. You know what you're looking at when you see one of these, whereas the 135 just fades into insignificance among regular traffic. The engine though does not, because that is a 3-litre turbocharged inline 6 known as the N55 B30, and it pushes out a whopping 235 kilowatt or 315 horsepower and 450 newton meters of torque. It's going through a ZF 8-speed transmission to the rear wheel. So despite the plain Jane exterior, the drivetrain is what makes this car fantastic. The GTI, on the other hand, has an EA888, a 2-litre turbocharged inline 4. They put it in just about every single Volkswagen, but of course tune it to different levels. In this one, it's tuned up to 162 kilowatt and just over 300 newton meters of torque. So it's a bit down on power, but fortunately, to even things up a bit, this one has a stage 1 tune. However, of course, the engine is mounted transverse rather than longitudinally, which means that it is front wheel drive and the power is going through a dual clutch transmission instead of the normal automatic over here. And now the interior. There are some things I like about a BMW and some things I like about this Volkswagen. I think the center stack and infotainment screen on my BMW is better. By having the controls down here and the screen right up on the top of the dash, it means that you don't really have to take your eyes very far off the road to operate it. And I prefer the climate control knobs in my car as well. But I think I prefer the gauges in this car. I don't like the off-center screen, especially at night. It just looks a bit half-baked. Whereas this one, just having 2 separate gauges and the central color screen in the middle, which shows lots of useful information, is a much better implementation. And I also prefer the Volkswagen steering wheel. It looks like a sporty steering wheel, whereas my one looks like an old 90s Honda pillow airbag steering wheel. But both of them possess a pretty similar level of features. They've both got cruise control, auto lights, auto wipers. They both have a similar shift knob assembly down here with Tiptronic mode. They both have equally comfortable seats, although in this one they happen to be manual, whereas my one has electric memory seats. Mine also has heated seats, which this one doesn't appear to have either. But the Golf is definitely more practical. It's got more boot space because it doesn't have any drive shafts back there, and it has a lot more rear legroom. That's one of the worst parts about my car, is the legroom in the back is really not great. I think the Golf looks better on the outside. It's more practical on the inside and has a better steering wheel, but the BMW has more features and a better implementation of technology. But let's see if the Golf drives better than the BMW. The Mark 7 Golf GTI. I've driven a Mark 4, 5, 6, and now the 7. And what an improvement. It's the same concept, 2-litre turbo, dual clutch, front wheel drive hatchback, but with a bit more power and a bit more refinement. Compared with my M135, some things I like: the steering. In my car, the difference between comfort and sport is negligible, to say the least. Was this, when you put it in sport, it gets nice and heavy. Because they both weigh about the same, to be honest, handling feels pretty similar. This rides a bit firmer, The dual clutch in this is sensational. Downshifts, perfectly smooth, crispy, every time it just nails it. And the upshifts, bang, immediate. And it's not quite so much of like a hard upshift, which is interesting. The engine is quite quiet, but sounds good. And with the stage 1 tune, this thing is a blistering machine. I know people love the ZF8, and I do too, and one part about it that I do like is the upshifts are more interesting, whereas this is just kind of always the same, always consistent, a bit like a video game. The sound changes, but there's no feeling behind each shift. But to be honest, in terms of its overall operation, honestly, the dual clutch is probably better, to be honest. It shifts that little bit quicker, and the gears are equally as short, even though it's got less of them, so it still feels like it's moving through the rev range. And I must admit, the advantage that the 135 has in that it's rear-wheel drive is kind of undone by the fact it should have better steering, because the front wheels are just left to do the steering. They're not being interrupted by 235 kilowatt. But the steering is frankly not as good as this. This is really nice, where it's not too quick on center, but then as you get into the turn, then it gets faster. The other issue is that despite the fact that it's rear-wheel drive, the 135 without a limited slip diff, it struggles to step the back end out, and you just sort of end up one wheel peeling, to be honest. And so it does kind of make you go, is it even worth having rear wheel drive if you can't sort of go sideways, which is the fun part of it, and the steering feel is no better. I've found the GTIs in general to be good, but not exactly mind-bendingly amazing, because they're just trying to be all things to all people. And this one is a bit the same. It's very uncompromised, so it's not really outstanding in any particular area, but it is very, very good in every area. And for that, this is going to be a hard video to wrap up. The M135i. The first utterly fantastic thing about this is the engine. Yes, with a stage 1 tune, the Golf makes as much power, and to my shock and amazement, was as fast in the little cheeky rolling race we did down the motorway on-ramp. But in this head-to-head comparison, the main advantage with this is you've got obviously more overhead, but also a better sound. The sound of that straight 6 engine and just the effortless power delivery that you get with a 6-cylinder is just sensational. And while the dual clutch is very good, so is this ZF8. I think the GTI has got slightly better steering feel, and it has a slightly stiffer ride. So on a road like this, you don't get quite as much body roll, I suppose. However, the M135 is a very comfortable car. And even though certainly in the dry, you're not going to be power sliding this thing to no tomorrow because it's open diff, it does have great balance, great handling, and overall is a very, very well put together package. To my surprise, the GTI was actually a lot better than I was expecting, given I've only driven sort of the older GTIs, and I would put it right on par with one of these M135s. For this to be truly another caliber of hot hatch, in my mind, it needs a limited slip differential to make it being rear wheel drive worth it in a way. But out of the box with the open diff, where this thing is not exactly a sideways machine like BMWs perhaps used to be, well, truth be told, if you put a stage 1 tune on the GTI, it will be as fast, as good to drive, as featuresome pretty much, depending on the spec that you get. And man, I think you've really got no choice but to just drive both and decide which one you like more. I wouldn't say that the GTI is good enough for me to suddenly sell up my M135 for one, but in driving it, it does make you appreciate that the other German manufacturers do still make some very, very good cars. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next time.